Lovely. So, welcome everyone. I'm Beck. I'm from the city of Stonington. I just want to start off with acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we're meeting tonight. And for Stonington, that's the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung and Bunurong people of the East Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to the elders past and present, as well as extending that respect to any Indigenous people joining us tonight and acknowledging the countries on which you're all joining from as well. We acknowledge a living connection to country, relationship with the land, and all living things extending back thousands of years for all Indigenous people. Thank you so much for participating in tonight's webinar on veggie gardening beyond the basics. It's a part of the My Smart Garden program. If you haven't heard of us before, we're a collaborative program between 8 Melbourne Metro councils, and we aim to help residents grow their own food, increase resilience in a changing climate, reduce waste and water use. Like I said, there's quite a number of you joining us tonight. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you can, please mute yourself as you come in and throughout the presentation. But feel free to enter any questions that you have in the chat box. And we're going to be recording tonight's presentation as well, so you'll be able to watch it back later on. So if there's anything that you're worried about that you might have missed, yeah, don't worry about that. And Maria's also very kindly provided us with notes as well for tonight's session, so I'll be sending all of those out afterwards as well. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce Maria, who's our presenter for tonight from My Green Garden. Maria is an experienced teacher with a background in nursery and horticulture. She's a regular on the My Smart Garden schedule and has also presented on radio. She's written for magazines and newspapers and now runs her business teaching lovely people all just like you. So Maria, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Beck, and thank you. I think whenever you do the welcome to country to people who are gardeners, I think it resonates a lot because I consider myself a custodian of the land that is currently under my name, but it won't be in perpetuity. So I want to be able to look after it so that generations to come can also enjoy it as well.
Definitely.
So welcome, gardeners. How's your summer been? And more importantly, did you get that beautiful rain that we got on Sunday? I know it wreaked havoc with the Grand Prix, but I was just so happy to see some lovely drenching rain. So what I'm going to cover tonight, my aim is to talk for about an hour. So I'm going to be racing through a few topics here and then sort of leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So do pop your questions in the chat box there and we'll try and get to them. So what I'm going to cover tonight, how to say goodbye to summer, because it just keeps lingering on and your veggies might still be producing, but at some point you're going to say, okay, that's enough. So once you do that, then you have to say thank you to the soil that produced all these beautiful veggies and give it a little bit of love too. And we'll go over that. Beyond the basics means we're not talking about just growing veggies, but really looking after the soil and in terms of what we call crop rotation. And I'll discuss why we do crop rotation and how you can use it to benefit your plants as well. Then I'm going to look at different plant families that are suitable to grow over winter and whether you should be starting them from seed or not. And if you are starting from seed, what's your timing like? It's certainly not too late now, but you would be wanting to get a move on. So looking at all the different choices of winter veg, some a little bit different that you may not have considered before. Their ongoing care, and that will include how to protect them from those slimy little creatures, those creepy crawlies, those little flying insects that will enjoy them before you do. So how to do a little bit of pest control without it being harmful in general. So let's get started. Saying goodbye to summer. When is summer over? So a lot of my plants are still producing. My zucchini plant, for example, I've got 3. One I've thrown out. One has got a mega zucchini on it that I have to keep there because I want to keep the seed from there. And the other one is just putting out a zucchini every now and again. Is there ever too many zucchinis? Well, not if you like to make preserves out of things. So I'm continuing to harvest from that. But others, look, I've started to pull out the tomato plants and so on. If you've got pumpkins growing, you know you need to leave them on the vine until the stalk that's attached to the pumpkin itself starts to wither away. If you pick it early, that's fine, you can eat it, but the pumpkin just won't be as sweet as what it could be. But you will find that some of your plants, say for example your zucchini, will be showing a lot of powdery mildew. So this weekend might be the weekend you say, okay, that's enough now. Let's pull things out so we can start our next step and get ready for our winter veg. But if you still want to keep things growing for a little bit longer, it doesn't mean you can't start seeds of your winter veggies at the moment. You just start them off in pots so that when the soil is ready, things can go straight in. Now, a little bit about beyond the basics also means that you need to start to understand the rhythms of your garden. And especially when we talk about crop rotation, it's pretty important to remember what you planted and where you planted it. Now, I've got several veggie patches, and I certainly am not going to remember from one year to the next what I planted. So I do keep a garden diary, and it's just an old sort of art exercise book, and I draw up my veggie patches, and I start to put things down that were there, or things that are going in, or actually I often write down when I started harvesting things, because I've found that harvesting has started a little bit earlier than it ever used to. So I just want to see if that's an ongoing trend or not, because we're talking about dealing with climate change, and perhaps that is what's going to happen. So I'll often record dates in my garden diary. I'll certainly review the season's successes / I should have written failures. Not everything works. So if you make a note of, for example, where you planted something, it didn't work there, well, that might be a reminder, okay, let's not plant it there again. Perhaps it got too much sun or not enough sun, or something else happened. So, that particular variety might not have been a great one to plant. So review those successes, but as well the failures. And this also helps you to plan forward. So I'll have in my garden diary, I will then turn over a new page, draw up the garden plan again. So I've got a warm season planting plan and a cool season, and we're moving into the cool season one. Eventually it will get cool. So this helps me to get clear in my head, well, what do I really want to plant? And then where am I going to put it? And that might have something to do with the crop rotation, which we'll have a look at as well, because I certainly can't rely on my memory anymore. It, one season just fades into the next. So having something down concrete, it's really quite good to look back at later on. Right, but if you have emptied out your gardens and you want to start, you might be a little bit dismayed, particularly if we were doing this talk this time last week, at how dry the soil is. If you haven't been watering consistently, it doesn't take long for soil to dry out. And you can tell if it's dry by when you go to water it, the water pools in little cracks and crevices in the soil and doesn't soak through. And if you scrape across the top of it, you might be able to see some dry patches. So the water might have only penetrated 0.5 centimetre, a few mils. So you think you're watering, but the water hasn't penetrated. That soil has become hydrophobic or water repelling. How can you re-wet it, or how can you get it to absorb that moisture all over again? Because it's no point planting into dry soil. Those plants are just going to suffer and die. So we have to try and overcome that. Hydrophobic nature of soil has come about because there's a certain soil bacteria which has a waxy coating, which has overtaken the other bacteria which will actually absorb moisture. Now, you can go to a nursery, for example, and you can buy a soil conditioner, which is called a soil wetter. And it's basically really just a very fancy detergent to overcome that waxy bacteria. And you've got to water it in and water it in and water it in again and again and again. If you want to save a little bit of money, and I do prefer it to do it this way, if you have a worm farm, I would invite you to get a a trowel load of the worm castings from the worm farm, separate the worms from the castings, and there are easy ways of doing that. And once you've just got the castings, which is effectively the worm poo, I'll put them in a watering can and I'll fill up the watering can with water and just stir it all up so that the castings have dissolved, I suppose, or, mixed through the water. And then I water my soil with that. Now, what is happening when I do that is that the bacteria that's in that vermicast, the worm castings, will overcome the hydrophobic or water repelling bacteria that's in your soil. So it's a natural soil wetter. So if you've got worm castings, if you've got a worm farm, here's another good reason to have one, to use your worm castings there. Or we wait for some good rain. So you may have found that after the weekend, we got about 30 mils here. I live in Donvale, eastern suburbs, and we got about 30 mil, and it was just glorious. And I'm hoping for some more follow-up rain tomorrow, but I did water again today. Okay, I don't want the soil to dry out in between because then I'm going to have to go through the trouble of trying to re-wet it. But this is really super important. Pull out your summer crops, re-wet that soil before you do anything else. So once it's re-wetted, now here is the time that you say thank you to your soil for being so good to you over summer. So that soil is packed a whole lot of punch into your veggies so that you can harvest vegetables. So it's pretty much depleted after that. So we've got to put something back in. And what I do, I call it soil rejuvenation. This is where I go to my compost bin, and hopefully you're all composting. And this is when I empty out my compost bin and I'll add it to the soil. The way I add it is I'll just put a layer of the compost, and when I say a layer, if you've got heaps of compost and only a small veggie patch, add lots of it. But if you've got a large garden, only a small amount of compost, you add as much as you can basically. But I lightly fork it in. So I've got a large garden fork and I'll just fork it through. Worms will come up and drag it down for you. So you don't have to do any wholesale digging and turning over the soil. I don't like turning over soil. Not only is it bad for my back, but it also is not fantastic for the soil either, because what you're doing, you've got to remember the soil is like full of living organisms that live below, ground level. By you turning them over, you're exposing them to sunlight, which they don't like, and they might just die. So I'll certainly I tickle this compost in. Now, if you don't have compost, you can certainly go and buy some well-rotted manures. So, for example, cow manure, mushroom compost, which is good over winter as well. Something just to put some oomph back into your tired soil. Just saying thank you to your soil. And you can see how much better the soil is looking there after I've added the compost or the manures to it. And then give it another good watering. And then depending on what you're going to plant in there, you might add some fertilizer. So the compost, the manures, that's just to rejuvenate your soil, to add some organic matter back into it. But some plants might need a little bit more of a feed before you go and plant them. So you might trundle off to your local hardware store. Hopefully you trundle off to a good nursery and you see row upon row upon row of different types of fertilizers. Can I tell you what I use? I avoid those aisles completely. I'll show you later what I use, but it depends on what I'm going to be planting. So here I'm going to look at different plant families that require a lot of nutrition, such as the things, this is specifically over winter time. I call them the heavy feeders, and they're anything in the brassica family. So it could be broccoli, cabbages, cauliflowers, any of those sorts of things. But there's also lots of Asian vegetables, the flowering ones, and Italian flowering greens too. Broccoli originally was coming from Italy. We now it's quite generic. We consider it just a normal vegetable, but it was originally an Italian import. So those ones are heavy feeders. Then we've got leafy vegetables that do require food, but they don't necessarily require an all-round, all-purpose fertilizer because we don't need them to flower. We just need them to grow lots of leaves for us. So any of the leafy vegetables grow over winter, such as spinach and silver beet. Some herbs love a bit of high nitrogen fertilizer, such as parsley, coriander. And then we've got the Asian and the Italian leafy greens, the ones that don't have flowering heads on them. So the difference between the heavy feeding, what I'm going to give the heavy feeders, and the high nitrogen one, if you remember, or if you know, as gardeners, you know that plants, there's three main food groups for plants. There's nitrogen, there's phosphorus, and there's potassium, which we call potash in gardening terms. So nitrogen creates the green part of your plant, particularly the leaves. The phosphorus allows the plant to photosynthesize and also helps the roots actually take up all the nutrients that are already in the soil. The potash adds an element that helps plants flower. Those three elements you will find in the fertilizer that heavy feeders need. Because after all, I'm not sure if you know this or not, broccoli, a head of broccoli is the immature flower. So if you ever let broccoli continue to grow and not harvest it, they are like the little seed buds that they sprout big, long, tall stems with a little yellow flower on top. That's if you let them grow and not harvest them. And from that flower comes the seeds from which we grow broccoli, in seasons thereafter. So we want them to put on that initial flowering stage. So that's why we need feed or fertilizer. It's got nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, which is your flowering element. But we don't want our silver beet or our spinach to start to flower. We don't want them to. We just want them to continue to grow and provide lots of leaves. So the leafy vegetables just need a fertilizer that's high in nitrogen, doesn't need the potash. And then we've got things that don't need much feed at all. In fact, if you feed the soil, things can go a little bit skew-if. So, for example, the alliums or anything in the onion family, the leeks, spring onions and chives, and even garlic, they don't need much feed in the soil. What I'll always do is always rejuvenate the soil, add my compost to it, but I won't necessarily add any extra feed. And definitely not for your root vegetables, carrots, beetroot, and radishes. Because if you're eating the root of a plant and you give it fertilizer, you're just going to encourage the tops of the plant to grow. And while sure, yeah, you can make things out of carrot tops and you can eat beetroot leaves, it's actually the roots that we're probably planting those for. So we avoid any extra fertilizer. Sure, let's compost the soil, let's rejuvenate the soil, but let's not add any more feed to it. And then there's another plant family called the legumes. Over summer, the legumes that you're probably growing are beans, the long green beans, all the different varieties of green beans. Over winter, we move into the peas and snow peas range, as well as broad beans. They grow over winter and sort of come into maturity in springtime. They produce their own food, and I'll show you a little bit later. So they don't need much feeding at all. Now, the reason you need to know about these things is that when you go to purchase fertilizer, if you don't have it already, this is what we're looking for. So before we plant, so you've done your soil rejuvenation, and before you plant, we add some sort of organic slow release fertilizer. So the ones that are heavy feeders, high general nutrient needs, and for example, the brassica family, it's sold as perhaps dynamic lifter or rooster booster, sometimes organic extra. What it is basically is chicken manure pellets, or chicken manure in a pelletized form with added bits and pieces in it, because chicken manure really just has nitrogen and phosphorus, doesn't have potash. So this gets added to it. So you'll know what they are. If I was doing this face to face and I took the lid off that little thing, you would smell. these pellets. They stink, all right, but they're great for your soil. They feed the soil so the soil can feed the plant. They're not a fast release, they're a slow release, which is what I aim for in my soil. So they're for your high feeding, but if you just want to put some fertilizer down for your leafy vegetables, then we put in blood and bone, because blood and bone only contains nitrogen for your green leafy stuff, as well as phosphorus. It does not contain any potash at all. So that will help. Now, I know some people, let me just do a word about blood and bone, have asked me about their tomato plants that are still beautiful and lush and green at this end of the season, but they've hardly put on any tomatoes. And when you work backwards and say, well, okay, what did you do to your soil? Well, they either put a lot of blood and bone in their soil, or they put a whole lot of, say, chicken manure in their soil. Both things that are very high in nitrogen, which encourages green leafy growth, but it doesn't encourage the flowering. So plants will flower as a response to stress. They think they're going to die, or, you fed the soil with potash, which encourages the flowering. But if you've got them in lovely, rich soil full of nitrogen, those plants just happily just live on, but without doing what you want them to do, which is produce those fruiting vegetables. So high nitrogen plants, just use blood and bone. Don't use the dynamic lifter. Now, the other plants that are light feeders only, I mean, if you wanted to, you could add this stuff called rock dust. Rock dust is just like, it is quite literally rock dust. So it is slow release. Once you put it in, it releases over, say, 6 months. And it adds those micronutrients. So the 3 macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, they're your main food groups, let's say. Micronutrients are all those minerals and other elements. Like, for example, for us taking a vitamin pill, if our diet isn't good enough, okay, you can't live on vitamin pills, but they certainly might boost where your general diet is lacking. And so that's what these micronutrients do. In soluble form, this rock dust is really seaweed. If people are putting liquid seaweed on their plants, that's what, in effect, what rock does is slow release, liquid seaweed does in fast. So looking at those plant families, there is also another soil additive that you might add at the moment. Some plants, particularly over winter, do better in alkaline soils. So if you don't know if your soil is acidic or alkaline, you can do pH tests. And if we were together, we would be doing some right now. But the pH test will tell you. But if you do need to add some garden lime to sweeten the soil or make it slightly more alkaline, we add garden lime or dolomite lime. Dolomite lime, the only difference is it also contains a micronutrient called magnesium. Now, vegetables that like a bit of alkaline soil are the alliums, the onion family, or any of the bean family. They do prefer things to be slightly on the alkaline side. Now, as a proviso, though, if you have to add this, don't add lime products at the same time as adding those fertilizers from the previous slide. They react. And what happens is that the nitrogen that's in your fertilizer will gas off and become part of the general atmosphere and not stay in your soil. So leave a couple of weeks. Either you add garden lime and leave it for 2 weeks and then add your fertilizer, or vice versa. Don't add them at the same time. All right. We're going beyond the basics. Now I want to talk about green manure crops as well. So I will use green manure crops over winter because even though in summer I get plenty of sunshine on my property, on my garden beds, in wintertime I don't. The lengthening shadows means I've got lots of places in shade. And rather than let the soil lie fallow or empty, I might put in a green manure. So this is a crop that we add to feed the soil. You won't be eating it. So what it contains is just seeds, and the seeds are legume seeds. You can see on the packet there, dun peas and lupins, they're both legumes, and then grassy matter. In this case would be oats and rye corn. Right? So we scatter this across the soil, and then it starts to grow, and that's what it might look like. When it gets to about knee high, or before it starts to flower, you get in there with your garden spade and chop it all down, and you can either lightly dig it through the soil or just let it lie on the soil surface. And the point of doing that, it adds manure to your soil in the form of this green matter. So it's adding organic stuff to your soil. So rather than just your soil doing nothing over winter, you might consider this green manure crop. So after it's dug in, you can wait a few weeks and then grow in that, or you can leave until summer and your soil will be well and truly ready to go. Right, so crop rotation. We do it for two reasons. The first reason is to avoid the buildup of pathogens in the soil that affect particular plants. The two main families of plants that are affected by soil pathogens, one of them are the Solanaceae family. Solanaceae, you might have been growing some over summer, and tomatoes are part of that family. So tomatoes, eggplant, capsicum, chili, and potatoes, they're all part of the Solanaceae family. So we try to avoid, say, growing tomatoes in the same spot year after year because of the buildup of those pathogens. So as soon as you put seedlings in, they might die, or something, things go wrong because the pathogens are there. So we break that cycle by not planting in the same spot year after year. Now that creates an issue if you're only got a small garden, okay? So one year you might have to break the cycle by planting your tomatoes in pots rather than in the ground. Or you can look for varieties of tomatoes that are disease resistant. And I did grow one this year and I was amazed at how well it grew. And it's called Burnley Sure Crop. Burnley Sure Crop. Lovely round tomatoes. And while other tomatoes around it were starting to go brown and everything, it was still beautifully green. So disease resistance is one reason. The second family is the brassica family. So anything in the broccoli family, we avoid growing that in the same bed year after year. So one reason for crop rotation is to avoid soil pathogens building up. The second reason is for nutrient cycling. So it makes sense, for example, that after you've had heavy feeders in the soil, so for example, you might have had tomatoes, which is part of the Solanaceae family. They've pretty much depleted that soil. So sure, put some compost in, but then it makes sense to, let's put in things that don't need much feeding. We follow the heavy feeders by light feeders. They'll be the alliums or any of the root vegetables, your carrots and so on. Then, once you've harvested those, that soil is pretty much depleted. You could go and add fertilizer to it, or you could grow a green manure crop over several weeks, chop that down in 2 or 3 months at time. So it's ideal over winter time that we grow green manure because then it's ready to go. So after green manure crops, you've fed your soil again, and then we can put in things like legumes. Legumes in and of themselves, they also feed the soil, so then it makes sense to follow the legumes by something that requires a lot of feeding. If you wanted to skip the green manure, then you'd go straight from alliums and root vegetables, and you'd go into the peas and snow peas after that. By the way, we never grow any of the onion family, the alliums, next to any of the legumes. It's because alliums have a natural antibacterial function, and our legumes use the bacteria that's in the soil to actually grow well. So if you grow them together, the alliums will actually stop the legumes growing very well, just by their antibacterial nature. Now, one of the handouts that I provided to Beck to provide to you talks about this in a lot more detail. So if you didn't get it all now, don't stress. All right, so we talked about the different feeding needs. Now let's talk about, if you want to start growing them from seed, I'm just going to give you a few quick tips on what to do for them. So the first type of growing from seed is indirect sowing, where you sow things first of all in punnets, and then once the seedlings have grown, then you transfer them on into the ground or into the pot. But you've got to start early. Did you know that it takes probably at least 4 weeks, if not up to 12 weeks, from getting things to grow from seed Okay, if you put some seeds in a punnet, you should expect to see something within a fortnight. But then to get them to the stage that they're ready to go in the ground might take another 4 to 6, even 8 weeks. So you have to be prepared to start early. And most people would have started, if they know what they're doing, they would have started, for example, their broccoli seedlings back in February. Now in February, I don't know about you, but I'm still full of harvesting stuff, and I'm just so busy harvesting and making preserves and so on that I haven't got time to start my seeds, or I sort of miss the mark. So I might be constrained to growing from seedling. Now, when I go through all the different plant families and all the different things you can grow, at the bottom it'll tell you what your time frame is to grow from seed or start from seedling. Now, when you want to grow from seed, first thing that is really important, you have to have the right soil temperature. At this time of the year, it's not too drastic because the soil temperature, say in a punnet, is going to be pretty much the ambient temperature, and most things will grow like that. Then we have to make sure that the soil or the growing media is evenly moist. It can't be allowed to dry out. Otherwise, those seeds that start to break open, put out their little seedling leaves, they might sort of just die off. So keep them evenly moist. Make sure when you plant them, you don't plant them too deeply because they will struggle to break through the surface of the soil. And then when they do start to grow, so for example, the one on the left, I might have just had in my laundry growing, but as soon as those seedlings start to show any leaves like that, they can't stay in the laundry. I have to put them outside in a sheltered spot so they can get some sunshine without the fierce afternoon sun, because otherwise they'll stretch and grow too big, too long, and their stems will be quite weak. So they're your main tenets when you're growing seeds, those different sorts of things. And the last one's really important. People think big, long seedlings with big, long stems are great. They're going to be really big. No, the stem will probably break. So indirect sowing, you can start that early. But direct sowing is what I like to do for certain plant families, and particularly when the seeds are quite large. And here I've got peas and broad beans there. They're really big, easy to handle. You would never, please never ever buy these in punnets already growing because it's dead easy. These are dead easy to grow yourself. Again, you need the right soil temperature. So as we start to cool down, that's the right soil temperature for these. Again, we've got to keep the soil evenly moist. But sometimes with big seeds, if we keep watering, they swell up and they'll rot. So when you're planting legumes, just make sure the soil is moist to start with, and then don't water it again unless we get, another run of really dry weather. Don't plant them too deeply, and here I have a bit of a problem with peas, for example. Sometimes I've planted peas and wondering, why aren't they coming up? And I've realized that mice or rats have gone and eaten them. So you just got to be a little bit careful there. Don't plant them too deeply, but you don't want vermin to come and eat them. And then once the seedlings are up, if there's too many seedlings growing too close together, you may need to thin them out so that they're not too many in a clump. And you have to keep them safe. And when I talk about safe, it's safe from things coming to eat them. And we'll talk about that towards the end. Okay, let's look at all different plants you can grow over winter. Now, each of them will have some sort of little symbol here. So if you see a one sun symbol, then that's okay. If you don't get too much sun in winter, they like some sun, but they're not desperate for a whole lot of sunshine. Two ones, you at least need some sun during the day. 3 sun symbol means it must have full sun over the cooler months. Now you might be saying, well, we don't get much sun over months, but whenever there is sunshine, these need sun. And I learnt the hard way over many years. Trying to grow broccoli, for example, in my heavily shaded garden, I just don't get beautiful big heads of broccoli. It's because of the lack of sunshine. I'm also going to have a little symbol if you want to grow your plants in pots. And note, I'm talking large pots. Tiny little pots are not going to grow very big plants for you. And then what might affect them. So slugs and snails, aphids, and the pesky one that we really have to worry about at this time of the year is the cabbage white moth. And at the end, we'll talk about them. So you'll see all the symbols there. Take note of those. And at the bottom, it tells you when to grow. If you want to grow from seed, how to grow it. Is it direct or indirect sowing? And then if you want to grow from seedling, when you can put them in. So let me talk about, for example, broccoli. A standard one is called a calabrese. There's also purple ones that, unfortunately, they look purple. I mean, they're purple when they grow, but when you cook them, the purple leaches out, so you're left with green broccoli. And there's also ones that sprout. Now, a lot of them, once you cut off the main head, those little side shoots will continue to sprout as long as you continue to harvest them. Okay, so keep cutting off those little broccoli and that plant will keep growing for you. But if you miss cutting them off, what happens, remember these little, these little florets in there, they are a potential flower spike. So you'll find that they start to grow really tall and have a flower at the end, and that flower will produce seeds. So if you don't keep cutting, what happens is they'll go into seed formation, and they're not good to eat at that point. And then we're getting to the Chinese style broccoli, same growing conditions, okay? They probably don't need as much sun because we're not expecting a large flower head, and that you tend to eat the stems and the stalks a lot more. By the way, standard broccoli, you certainly can eat the stems and the leaves, but we're just not used to doing that. But the Gaylan or the Chinese broccoli, we would be. Then there's cabbages and cauliflower. Again, a lot of sunshine is needed for these to get decent sized heads. And these ones are a little bit problematic because if you say buy a punnet of cabbages, you're going to get 6 or 8 cabbages all maturing all at the same time. So you might want to either grow from seed, not grow as many, or share a punnet of seedlings with other people, or make a lot of sauerkraut at the end of the season. They're all affected by the same creepy crawlies. I do prefer actually growing wombok, one of the Chinese cabbages. They grow a lot more quickly than your traditional Savoy style cabbage. Nice and tender, and you know they're much easier to eat as well. So I do prefer the Chinese cabbages. Also in the brassica family are the kales. Now, you're probably used to the one on the right, and that's known as your Tuscan kale, but there's lots of other different varieties. We tend not to eat the stem. It's really quite woody, so you sort of scrape back or cut off the stem and use the main leafy part. They don't need as much sun because you're not wanting them to flower, right? So definitely will need some, but won't need full-on sunshine. And they are suitable to grow in pots. Again, they're going to be affected by those same creepy crawlies as the other brassicas, and particularly that cabbage white moth. Other brassicas with an Asian twist. This is a type of cabbage, but those leaves are like the size of a spoon, so tatsoi. And the beauty of this is that you can just, harvest leaves at a time to add to your stir fries. So you don't need to pull out the whole plant, and that will keep producing for you. And because it's small, suitable for pots again. Then all the spicy, peppery ones. So brassicas are sometimes called the mustard family. And when you start to eat mizuna or mibuna or these mustard greens, you'll get this really peppery, fiery taste, which I really quite enjoy. But I wouldn't, for example, have a salad that's just full of mizuna and mibuna. You just have sort of touches of it in there because it really is quite overpowering. And mustard greens, I just like to nibble as I wander through the garden. And the seeds from these sorts of things is what we call mustard seeds, which we use in cooking or in making in mustards. Seeds or seedling, they'll all be fine in pots as well. And because being brassicas, they all are afflicted by the same creepy crawlies. Let's get on to the legumes because these are great to grow over winter. But I find in my garden, I don't know if it's a factor because I don't get much sunshine, they certainly grow, but I don't get the actual fruit from the plant, the broad beans or the peas or the snow peas. I don't get them till, say, September, October. Now, if you're in a garden that gets plenty of sunshine, they will produce earlier for you. And these are things that you can just keep picking and picking and picking. Now, I think we're all familiar with eating snow peas. but have you ever eaten peas that you've podded yourself straight from your plant? They hardly make it indoors for us. We just stand around and pick them and just pod them and eat them then and there. They are like sugar, like beautiful, delicious tasting sugar in a pod. Very, very sweet. These aren't affected by cabbage white, so they're good to go. But snails will eat the leaves. They won't eat them down to the ground. They certainly take a nibble, snails and slugs. Not too much of a problem. Like I said before, I have a problem when I'm actually sowing them that other things don't come and eat them. So when I sow them direct into the ground, I'll put the seeds in. I will cover where I've planted them with shade cloth that I've weighted down at the ends, but I need to lift that up every couple of days because as soon as I see them sprouting, I've got to take the cover off. And that's to stop rats digging and eating my seeds before I manage to get to them. Now, they either come in a dwarf form or a tall growing form. If they're going to be tall growing, they need to have support. Even dwarf form, they still get to 30 to 60 centimeters tall. So you notice in the middle there, I've got them in a pot. I probably overplanted those, oversown those. There's too many plants in there, and sometimes it's hard to see I think they were snow peas in there. Hard to see the snow peas because of so much foliage. So direct in the pot, and you've got all winter to grow these. Broad beans, a little bit, you need to get them in the soil before May, and then they just do their own thing. They will need support as they grow. Most of them are quite tall growing, although I think there are some smaller ones. And we also got ones that are crimson broad beans too, which look quite attractive. They've crimson flowers, which look quite attractive. And they tend to harvest late in my garden. I don't harvest them until about November. But I do like to grow them for this fact. If you ever pull them up, you see tiny little nodules on their roots. Those nodules fix nitrogen, which means they can get nitrogen that's in the air and have it fix it or catch it from its gaseous form into a form that makes it available to the plant's roots. So when I actually, after I've finished harvesting my broad beans, I don't pull out the whole stalks. I'll cut them to ground level so that that nitrogen rots back into my soil and provides feed for the next crop that's coming through. So this nitrogen fixing bacteria is really valuable. And that's why planting legumes is a good idea because they feed the soil as well as producing fruit for you. All the leafy greens, and now's the time to do it. You might have tried to grow lettuces and things over summer. They don't like the heat. And silver beet doesn't like it much either, but now's the time to get your silver beet in if you like it. White stemmed stuff or the rainbow chard, which has got lots of different colours. The spinaches now, English spinach, you'd understand. People ask me how to grow baby spinach. Well, if you're growing baby spinach, all that happens is you're growing spinach, but you're harvesting the little leaves as they grow. So you're going to have to plant a lot of spinach in order to get those little leaves, harvest those as they go along. There's also perpetual spinach, which is a cross between your regular English spinach with silver beet. So it's perpetual. It doesn't last forever. It lasts for 2 years, whereas English spinach just will last. It's just one season. I like to indirectly sow these in punnets and then plant them out later on. Lettuces as well. Like I said, lettuces don't grow well over summer. It's just too hot. Shoulder season, so it's in autumn now, and then later on in spring is your best time for lettuces. And here is a case where you might just scatter some seed over the ground and keep it moist, and up they come. Over winter, if you do want to grow lettuce though, in the heart of winter, you're going to have a very sunny spot. I don't have that, so my lettuce sits there for ages and ages, and it's not very nice when it's been sitting too long. It tends to become bitter. So lettuce is something that you want to try and crop really quite quickly. So something that's high in nitrogen is a good feed for any of these plants. Other leafy greens that grow well, either of the rockets. So you're familiar with the wild rocket. That's the one on the right-hand side, which you buy from your supermarket, which can be an environmental weed. Got to put it out there. It self-seeds very easily and comes up everywhere. So if you're living near parklands or something, it's not a good idea to grow that one unless you keep harvesting it and not let it start to flower. The one on the left is called salad leaf rocket. It's just got a much wider leaf. It still has a peppery flavour. So I do prefer to grow the salad leaf one. Coriander. If you've ever let coriander just go to seed if you're growing it, and again, people like to grow it over summer because it goes well with summer salads, but it doesn't like summertime. It grows from autumn, winter, spring, and then it stops and goes to seed. But if you've ever let it go to seed and the seed drops, I would expect if we get some rain again tomorrow and the soil starts to cool down over the next month or so, you're going to get coriander seedlings coming up everywhere because the soil temperature is right for them to germinate. The seeds might have been staying there all summertime, but because the soil temperature wasn't right, they just sit there. When it's right, up they come. And we need to protect these from snails. Garlic. Let me spend a little bit more time on garlic because this is a crop that's well worth growing. So unless you buy organic garlic, the garlic that you're getting from the supermarket might be Australian grown, but it has been treated to stop it sprouting prematurely. Garlic that you got from overseas has been treated that way, but it's also been treated to prevent any soil-borne diseases coming into Australia. And the stuff that they spray it with is actually quite toxic. So growing it yourself certainly makes sense. You need deep soil though. Those roots that you can see attached, that's only a tiny amount of the roots that's left over after the garlic's harvested. They actually go very, very deep. So you need soil that's at least 30 to 40 centimetres deep in order to grow big garlic cloves. Small ones, yeah, they'll grow in any soil, but if you want those nice big ones, bulbs, you need deep soil or deep pots. I enrich the soil with the compost. It also needs to be well drained because this garlic's sitting there for a good 6 to 8 months. It's about 28 to 32 weeks, so 7 to 8 months. So if their roots are sitting in water, they're not going to like it. So your soil has to be well drained and as much sun as you can give them. Again, I managed to grow good garlic even though I don't get full sun. By the time the garlic needs to fatten up, which is after the spring equinox, I'm getting sunshine again in my garden. So don't stress too much if you don't get sun in your garden at going into winter. It's into spring that sunshine has its effect on the garlic itself. So if you want to plant garlic, don't go to a supermarket, go to a good nursery, or there's online seed companies, they'll sell garlic as well. Separate the cloves before planting. We plant them with the root side down or the blunt side down, and probably about 7 centimetres down. I sort of look at my thumb. I might poke my thumb into the soil or something of the same length as my thumb and put the garlic at the base of that and cover it over. Best time to do it. Okay, the old adage is you plant on the shortest day and harvest by the longest day. Far better though, in between, by the autumn equinox. Yeah, the autumn equinox, which is coming up next week. No, it's a couple of days' time, March 22nd. Any time between then and the winter solstice is the best time to plant. The earlier you can plant it, the bigger your bulb will be because it needs a long time in cold soil. So if you're only planting in the middle of the year in the winter solstice, you're missing May and June, which are both going to hopefully cool down as normal. And you can expect to harvest, and this is where your garden diary comes in handy, 28 to 32 weeks later. So write down in your diary when you actually plant it. That'll give you an idea of when you're ready to harvest. Just quickly look at the other onion family that you can plant. They all take a long time, except for your spring onions on the right. So we've got the your red or the Spanish onions on the left, plenty of sunshine. Leeks take ages. If you want to eat leeks this winter, you should have planted them last September, a long time ago. They take ages to really thicken up that stem. And then there's things like shallots. Shallots are great to grow. You separate them like you'd separate a garlic bulb into different cloves, grow them. They take ages, but then they store well for a long time as well. So if you've got space, perhaps some shallots. And if you haven't got space, then spring onions. And chives, I've got chives growing wild in my garden because they flower in spring, and then you can see that it's in between some cracks in some paving there. I've got chives growing everywhere. They're very good to grow. So spring onions and chives are fine in pots. The others are probably best straight in the ground. And aphids are the main things that you need to worry about with the alliums. Root vegetables. The main tip I'll give you with root vegetables is to plant direct sow from seed up until about May. So now's a good time to do it. After that, it gets a little bit too cold, but then you can start again in September to plant them. And always direct sow from seed. The reason we don't grow, for example, carrots from seedling, and even beetroot too, radishes are just easy to grow from seed. But the reason we don't is that when imagine you've got a punnet of carrot seedlings, and you're teasing them apart to plant them individually, invariably you're going to damage the roots. And when you damage the root and you put it down there, that carrot is going to grow very skew-if. It's going to have little arms and legs and everything. Still edible, but just not a lovely long straight carrot that we're used to. It's because there's been root damage. However, if you grow them from seed, there's no root damage there at all. And make sure your soil is not fed with anything. Just compost is fine, but not anything high in nitrogen, because you'll get lots of leafy growth and not much bottom growth, which is what we're after. Okay, let's have a look at some ongoing care. Right, so there's plenty of things you can grow over winter. They're not as exciting, say, as your tomatoes and zucchini and cucumbers and so on. And the rate of growth will be slower, but still it's a lot more gentle in the garden, except for needing to combat some of the pesky little insects that want to get to your vegetables before you do. So when I talk about ongoing care and we look at pest control, this is what I like to look at first of all. Work out what is it that's eating my plants. And for that, if you can't tell straight away, and this comes with experience, but if you can't tell, you need to go outside at night time with a torch, particularly if it's been raining, because that's when things will come out. So go out with a torch and see what's going on out there. A lot of these insects, or whatever they might be, take cover during the day because otherwise they'd be easy targets for birds, for example. And so they'll come out at night time to feed. So once you've ID'd what it is that's eating your plants, then my next port of call is trying to stop those pesky things getting to my plants, and that's called exclusion, stopping them getting to the plants. Then trying to trap them away from my plants. My last resort is looking at chemical deterrents, otherwise known as pesticides. That's my last resort. So let's have a look at some of them. And this is the most important one you'll have to contend with if you're growing any of the brassica family, whether it be kale, whether it be broccoli or cabbage, or any of the Chinese greens. What happens is this butterfly will be flitting around during the warmer months, and it's looking for somewhere to lay its eggs, so that once those eggs hatch out, we've got lots of very hungry caterpillars here, which very quickly will start to eat away at your plants and skeletonize your plants, basically. So what I need to do is, as soon as I've planted, and I mean as soon as I've planted any of those broccoli seedlings or any of the brassicas, I have to put some sort of netting over the top to stop them getting in. And I need to prop up that netting so the netting isn't sitting flush on the leaves of the seedlings, because they might even be able to lay their eggs through those holes. Now, we all know, I hope, that exclusion netting nowadays can't be the old bird netting with holes, about a centimetre wide. We're not allowed to use those in the state of Victoria anymore because of the issues with birds and other small animals getting stuck in them. So this exclusion netting is much, much finer. We need to keep that on until the weather cools down sufficiently. And I used to say it was until May, because once the weather's cooled down, the cabbage white moths aren't active anymore. But I would probably keep it on a little bit longer now because of the warming seasons and so on, if you see them around. Now, if they've managed to get to your seedlings before you've excluded them away, there are some safer pesticides that you can use. The first one is called dipel, and that comes from a soil bacteria that scientists have discovered will, after you've sprayed, you need to spray the affected leaves, or any of the leaves, I suppose, but spray the affected ones. The caterpillars will continue to eat for another day, but then once they've ingested the treated leaves, what happens is that the bacteria in the pesticide chews up their stomachs and they'll die. So dipel is one. Yates Success works the same way, it's just got a different active ingredient. So they are both things that I'm loath to use, and I probably don't need to use because I use that exclusion netting, but I have used them in the past. Slugs and snails. Now, they'll, even though it's been dry, say up until Sunday, slugs and snails are still around, particularly snails. They can coat, they sort of retract into their shell, and that opening the shell is coated with some sort of mucus that dissolves when it rains. So that gives them the wake-up call to come out of their shell and go out and start to eat. Otherwise, they can stay like that for a long time. So what I like to do, first of all, plants will look after themselves when they're big enough. And a few nibbled edges and things I'm not fussed about either. But it's the seedlings that we need to watch out for. So, for example, a form of exclusion to stop snails and slugs getting to your young seedlings might be things like that. Just, cut up drink bottles that are placed over them at night time. During the day, you can take them off, but at night time, until the plants get big enough that they, a little nibble here or there doesn't bother them. Another type of exclusion which I like to use, and this is reusable year after year, I've got some old PVC pipe that my husband cut down for me, and then you can buy this copper tape which is has a backing of adhesive. It's like a glue, and I put it around that that PVC pipe. Or it could be any type of pipe, really. It could even be a drink bottle. It's just that the PVC is really quite hard wearing, and I've used them for years now. So what happens is the snail senses that there's something in there. It goes to slide up there, and once it slides over that copper part, it gets a bit of an electric shock, and so it retreats, and it won't go up there. So I've saved, hundreds of seedlings just by using these types of little barriers, basically. So it's well worth buying this. It comes in a roll because it certainly doesn't go off. It's something you can use again and again. There's also things called barrier gels, which you put a barrier around the plants themselves. But again, if it rains, you need to redo it. And you notice it says near the lid, it lasts up to 2 weeks. So it's something you need to reapply. You might have heard of things like crushed eggshells. They've got to be really, very finely crushed and in a very thick layer around your plants. So unless you've been saving eggshells, it's probably a bit expensive nowadays to be getting eggshells to do this sort of thing. So perhaps save them along the way, dry them out really thoroughly, and then crush them up and keep them for this purpose. Now, as an aside, what I do is I crush the eggshells very, very finely, like I'll put them through a blender, and that adds extra calcium to my soil, which is really good for tomatoes. But that's another story for another day. So have a look at what you might have at home that you could use. Your last resort are the pellets, the snail pellets. There are some that are pet friendly. Now, the reason we don't want to use these is that if the snails and slugs ingest them, sure, they'll die, but anything that eats the snails and slugs afterwards might also die. And that includes your animals. So, but particularly things like birds. So the ones that if I were to use them, they're the only ones I would use. It's a brand called Multigard. You can tell you've got them because they're a reddish brown colour. And the active ingredient is, it's a chelated iron called EDTA. Don't worry too much about that. But as it breaks down, it also puts a bit of iron in your soil, which is good. The other colour ones, the blue and green ones, they're, I think the active ingredient is something called metaldehyde, not good for anything that eats those snails afterwards. So be very careful with using those. There's also lots of other traps you can use for snails too, but this is just some simple ones. The second one, that copper tape, once you've set that up, you've got those little sleeves for life, and they do work really well. Aphids. Now, aphids come in all shapes and colours, unfortunately. I tend not to stress too much about aphids. I find that they, particularly at the start of spring, I might see on my rose bushes, for example, a whole lot of aphids taking over. I just sit back, let nature take over, because I know there's lots of predatory insects that are waiting for something to feed on, and they come. But those predatory insects are only going to be in your garden if you're giving them some sort of place to stay or some sort of thing to attract them. So in all of my veggie patches, I'll have flowers growing. And this is one of my favourite ones. It's alyssum, sometimes called sweet Alice. It self-seeds. So once you've got it in there, it'll just keep coming up again and again. It's just a low-growing ground cover. But that does tend to attract a lot of those beneficial or predatory insects. So what happens is that, for example, ladybirds might be in there. And if you've got nettles in your garden, ladybirds will overwinter, or they'll live overwinter in those nettles. But anyway, what happens is those ladybirds lay eggs, and those eggs hatch out to a juvenile ladybird, which is actually quite much larger than its parent. And if you've ever seen anything like this, they're either black with red stripes or black with yellow stripes. Those juveniles love eating aphids. So do ladybirds, but the juveniles just have a voracious appetite. So they'll be there and they'll eat those aphids for you. Or there's other predatory insects, and these are really quite gruesome. So what you're seeing there are aphids, those green things, and then you're seeing parasitized aphids. So what that means is a particular insect, the name escapes me right now, but what it does, it lays its eggs inside an aphid. And that aphid grows and grows and becomes one of these little brown things. It's effectively died. But the aphid is host to these predatory insects laying their eggs in them. It's something like out of Aliens. It's really quite gross. But if you ever see those things around your aphids, it means you've got those great predators coming in to take over and eat those insects. Now, if you're the sort of person that as soon as you see an aphid, you reach for a spray, you might be spraying, it's some friendly fire basically, you might be spraying some of the nature's good or beneficial insects as well. So that's why I like to steer clear. You've got to hold your breath. You got to say, okay, not touching, I hope they go away. Sometimes I might squish them between my fingers or something if there's far too many, but I know because I'm not spraying in my garden that I've got a lovely balance of great insects in there that will come over and, the cavalry's arrived and that they take over. If it is problematic though for you, you can make up a soap spray, but just make sure there's nothing else on there besides the aphids when you're spraying. So identification and understanding insects and who they are and what their purpose is in your garden. That's really important. So if you ever come across an insect, and this is where social media is really great, there's certainly lots of garden groups. If you ever come across an insect, you're not sure what it is, take a photo of it, post it to one of these Facebook pages, and people will tell you, you know, it is a friend or it's foe or whatever it is, so that you can identify it rather than sort of searching through endless books trying to find out what things are. Okay, it's just after 8, so I'm just going to do a quick recap and then we'll get on to some questions. And I'm not sure if we've got many, Beck, but let's have just a quick recap. So at the moment, you're probably at the stage you're either removing or you have removed your summer veggies. So it's time to do some soil preparation. So first up, don't forget you've got to re-wet that soil so that we're not planting into dry soil. It's a recipe of disaster. You're wasting your time and your money. And rejuvenating that soil, saying thank you for having fed me over summer. I'm going to feed you now by emptying out my compost bin or adding some cow manure or some mushroom compost to you. Okay. After your soil prep, then you choose your plants. So you can be starting to think about that now and whether you're going to start them from seed or seedling. It's certainly very exciting starting from seed. I always get excited when I see seeds germinate, and I've planted thousands over the years, but I still get excited. But there's a lot more care required from you to do that. Can I suggest though, don't rush out to the nursery and buy a whole lot of seedlings if your soil's not ready yet. You've still got time. And then we get on to the planting. The planting's the easy part. Really, it's your soil prep and your planting. That takes a lot longer. The planting, that's easy. But you've got to, as soon as you plant, you've got to take measures for pest control. Otherwise, you're wasting your time and it gets really frustrating. And I hate it when people are so disheartened that they don't want to try again. So you've got to be one step ahead of those pesky insects. And then a little bit of ongoing feeding. I didn't go into that in any detail. But if you've fed your soil beforehand, you might not need too much ongoing feeding. But just a note, if you're going to feed your plants, particularly the heavy feeders over winter, sea salt is not a plant food. Okay, but sea salt is like a tonic. It's a bit of a pick-me-up. It adds micronutrients. It's like us taking a vitamin pill, but it's not food. So people will say, oh, I've put sea salt, I've been feeding. You haven't. You've been adding micronutrients. You need to add some liquid fertilizer that has macronutrients. So either you've got your own worm farms that you're getting the liquid stuff out of, or you might have a bokashi bin. If you know what those things are, you're going to get liquid out of that. Or you can purchase fertilizers such as Charlie Carp. I like Charlie Carp because it's doing something with a pest that's taking over our waterways. It's making good use. So it stinks a bit, but if I'm going to ever buy fertilizer, it's Charlie Carp. Okay, let's take some questions, and I'll just direct you to a few websites. My Green Garden is my website, which is currently going to be reconstructed. There's so much information in there, but I think it's too unwieldy. But so news on that soon. But another one's called Gardenate, and it's called gardenate.com. So if you ever wonder about when to plant things, I have for many years subscribed to gardenate.com. You can either purchase it as an app or you can just get it online. And it will ask you, where do you live? And you put in Australia, and then it says which zone. And you try to type in Melbourne or Geelong, wherever it might be. And that's going to tell you, no, that's not a zone. It's asking you, are you cool temperate? Are you warm temperate? Or you could be tropical, but we're not yet anyway. Melbourne is considered warm temperate. Once you subscribe to that and it's got your details, warm temperate or something, you can subscribe to either a monthly email or a fortnightly one with reminders of what to plant when and when to start it from seed, or whether to, put seedlings in right now. And if you're starting from seed, should it be under cover or it should be outside? It's a treasure trove of information. So until you've got the experience to know what to do when, gardenate.com could be your best friend. I'd really recommend it. And then, of course, the My Smart Garden website. That's full of information because My Smart Garden's been going for a long time now. And every time we do any of these presentations, they all get uploaded to that as well as information sheets. Okay, that's it from me talking. Now, Beck, have we got questions?
Yeah, we certainly do. And I just want to reiterate, I love Gardenate too. I love getting the monthly reminders about what I should be putting in and what I should be doing. It's always really useful.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question from Joanne about different types of manures. And do you find that some of them change the pH in the soil, particularly looking at mushroom compost?
Yes, and mushroom compost is good. It will make your soil slightly more alkaline. In fact, will make it considerably more alkaline, but for winter veggies, that's quite good. So there are the alliums, so the onions. They do like a more alkaline soil, and also the brassicas, the broccoli family. They do prefer it, as well as the legumes, your broad beans. So a lot of your winter veggies do like a more alkaline soil. If you do add mushy compost, you don't need to add garden lime. Okay. Now, just a note about garden lime, and this is where your diary comes in handy. You wouldn't lime your soil more than once every 2 years. I never remember when I limed my soil last, unless I've written it down in my diary, my garden diary.
We've got a great question from Rowena when we were talking about crop rotation.
Yeah.
They were wondering about volunteers that come up in the same spot. So particularly they've had cherry tomatoes coming up in the same spot for 3 years running. I'm sure a few of us have had
Okay.
the similar thing, and whether they should be thinking about like removing those for soil condition and that kind of thing.
Yeah, look, I would. Cherry tomatoes are indestructible, and every time you don't pick one and it drops to the ground, you'll get them coming up again. Yeah, you can certainly. Tomato seedlings are very easy to transfer. So yes, I would be lifting them and moving them ideally. Having said that, cherry tomatoes are probably a lot more resistant to plant diseases as well. But yeah, for crop rotation purposes, yes, I would. I would move them.
And Catherine's wondering the best way to add fresh chicken manure to our compost.
Yeah, I've got chooks too, Catherine. So what I do, my chooks sleep or in their chicken coop. They're on a bed of wood shavings. So in the end, I'm mixing wood shavings with my chicken manure into my compost. All right. So, but if you've got straight chicken manure you're putting in your compost, that's pretty high in nitrogen. You need to balance it with something that's high in carbon. In my case, the wood shavings are high in carbon, so it's a beautiful mix in there. That's why the compost turns out well. So you'd be looking for something high in carbon. And we're coming to the time of the year when we're going to get lots of autumn leaves. So get out there and start collecting autumn leaves. And I'd be mixing those in with my chicken manure. Your compost will tell you if you've overdone it. If you put too much high nitrogen without the high carbon, your compost will be slimy, it'll be wet, and it'll be smelly. So you do need that carbon stuff just to balance that out.
Yep. That will be certainly stinky.
Yeah, yeah. But otherwise chicken manure is great in the compost.
Yeah, it is. I think it's Artie. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Talking about snails, they see a lot of snail shells broken or empty. What could be doing this? Birds or mice? I think I have an idea, but Maria?
I've got little skinks, which are tiny little lizards. Okay, so presuming you haven't been putting pellets out, those lizards eat them. So they're great. If you ever see these tiny little lizards called skinks, they eat snails and slugs too. So that could be them.
And rats was the other thing that I've noticed. Loves
eating snails and slugs.
Oh, not slugs, just snails.
Oh, I wish they'd do it in my garden.
Yeah.
No, I haven't noticed that. They could well be the case, but I haven't noticed that, no.
Janelle's just said a comment, Eco Shield for snails and slugs is also a safe organic garden product.
Yep.
Another person's wondering about which manure to use. I guess the benefits of different manure. So chicken versus cow versus sheep.
Okay. All right. Chicken manure straight into your garden's not a great idea. It's just too high in nitrogen. It's also and particularly unless you're going to put it in and not plant anything for several months, just to give it time to settle down, it's just far too strong. So the bird manures are very strong because when they, too much information here, but when they poo and wee, it's in the same little lump. So it's really, really quite concentrated. And So chicken manure is best composted before you put it through your garden, whereas cow manure, if you've got guinea pigs, you've got sheep, those sorts of things, they're much gentler, and so you add them to your, and when you get them, they're partially composted. But if you've got guinea pigs or rabbits, we used to have a rabbit, and that's like pelletized manure for you. You know, you just sprinkle it over the soil. It's fantastic stuff. Uh, Manures that come from animals that eat meat, we don't use. So we don't use dog or cat poo, for example, just because pathogens, they're too close to humans, and pathogens in their poo might transfer to the vegetables. So we don't use those manures.
And Laura's got a question, thoughts on wicking beds, particularly from IBCs, which are the large old sort of
Yep.
food grade containers.
Yep.
She said, I'm part of a community garden and looking to put in some low cost beds, either no dig or considering wicking beds, as watering over summer was a nightmare.
Mm. Okay. We converted one particular bed, which was U-shaped. We changed into two long wicking beds, and it was phenomenal. Sure, it took a lot of water, but the soil didn't dry out, and it was the tomatoes were fantastic. I just got so many out of there, out of those wicking beds. So you need to build them properly, okay? Because I have heard of people that plants have died because the water hasn't drained away. There's had too much water in there. But once you've built them properly, I'm never looking back. I'm looking forward to putting garlic in there. It's part of my crop rotation cycle because apparently garlic does really well in wicking beds as long as the roots aren't sitting in the water itself. So yes, if you get, you could convert those IBCs to wicking beds, definitely. But just do your research on how to set them up and to make sure you do it properly first time round.
I've also recently converted to wicking beds with IBCs, and I'm also completely obsessed with
Yes,
them.
yeah, yeah,
Gardening Australia, Laura has a really great resource for information, and also Very Edible Gardens. They sell wicking
yeah.
beds, but they also have some good information on their
Yes,
website about,
that's how I got my information from the veg
yeah.
group. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and Laura's also wondering, Maria, what watering method you use, like dripper, irrigation, wicking, hose, anything else?
Okay. Over summer, it's definitely drip irrigation. So it's like a brown sort of hose with holes every, I think, 20 or 30 centimeters apart, and it just drips into the soil. I hand water pots, but the drip irrigation where I don't have the wicking beds. The wicking beds get sort of fed with a hose into the subsoil, and there's a subs in the bottom part, and that's how I water those. But otherwise, if I've got to put a timer on, it's with drip irrigation, but not over
And
winter. Okay, I didn't talk much about watering over winter. In fact,
mm,
I didn't talk about it at all. If it continues to be dry, we'll need to continue to water. But otherwise, I don't water too much over winter if it's wet enough. Yeah.
and Karen's wondering about collecting fruit from zucchini. Do you need to leave the fruit, such as zucchini, on the plant before you save the seeds until they
Yes.
go brown?
Yeah, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they
Gigantic.
start to grow yellow. Mine tend to go yellow, and you need an axe to open them up because the outside's like it becomes quite hard, like a pumpkin, for example. Yeah, and then the seed from within that is well, it's fertile. What's it called? It's viable seed after that, and they last for years too. Those seeds.
I've posted a link in the chat as well about a seed saving recording that we've done. I'm not sure if it covers zucchini, but have a look and yeah, hopefully you'll get some useful information out of that. Sylvie has just said she's just moved into a unit in Sydenham. Previous owner put down plastic weed mat and white
Well,
pebbles everywhere. I think the
well,
soil's very compacted. Planning to put down cardboard and raised beds. Is there anything else that I should be putting down to improve the soil and encourage earthworms back?
Oh yeah, yeah. Look, what I would be, yeah, get rid of all the plastic and all the. I moved into a garden that had that once. It's terrible. Okay, so don't try and dig into the soil. Just leave it as it is. You're going to be building up instead. Okay, unless you want wicking beds because they're a self-contained unit, right? And wicking beds are also useful if there's neighbouring trees. Because that's why we converted to wicking, because I've got a tree which is several meters away whose roots were going into the soil and taking all the moisture. So those original beds I'd built up, not in the soil, but built them up, and I did it using a no-dig method. So newspaper or cardboard goes on the base, and then you put alternating layers of something that's carbon rich and something that's nitrogen rich. So at the base could be wads, and they're called biscuits of pea straw. You imagine a big bale of pea straw. If you untie the strings, they sort of come apart in big chunks. They're called biscuits. So you lay those down. Worms love pea straw. So that could be your bottom layer, and then you start to do no dig style garden where you're adding layers of different things, and then you need to wait for a little bit, and then you can start to and that becomes soil in it of itself, and that will certainly enrich the soil that's down below, but you'd never be digging into that soil down below. So you need to build the beds up. But just watch, first of all, are there neighbouring trees where their roots can come into your beautiful new soil? If there are, then wicking beds have to be your answer there. And unfortunately, with more denser and closer living and people planting trees, which is wonderful, the problem is those roots will get into your veggie patches, and your veggie patches will end up being very dry.
I'm just posting. We've recently run a workshop on restoring healthy soils as well, so I'll just pop that in the chat.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, I just have to scroll back up to where I was. Lee's got a great question. Earwigs, good or bad?
I was going to add something about earwigs, and I thought I'm going to run out of time. Earwigs are both predatory, but they will eat your seedlings. And I find that's more of a problem over the warmer months than now. They come out of hibernation or they hatch out in springtime. All right, so with earwigs, I do try and keep them away. What I need to do is you understand what earwigs do. They eat at night time and then they hide during the day. So what I do is I give them a place to hide. So it could be, for example, a short length of hose, or it could be a bit of newspaper scrunched up in a small yogurt pot or something, and I'll leave that near the susceptible plants. So they go and hide in there. They come out at night time, they'll hide in there. And then you've got to do this though in the morning, go and take out that bit of hose or take out that little yogurt pot, empty it out perhaps in hot soapy water, or if you don't mind squishing them. And that way you try and keep their population down a little bit. But earwigs are a huge problem in my garden, and I just was concerned about time. That's why I deleted the slide about earwigs, but otherwise that was certainly something I would have talked about. So there's no pesticide, you can't spray them if you can't see them, but you've got to find their hiding spots or create a hiding spot for them that you go and remove during the day, and kill off the earwigs that way. But look, on the other hand, they are predatory as well, but they'll certainly make a meal out of your seedlings, unfortunately, until they're big enough to look after themselves.
Excellent. Oh, another great question. How far apart do we plant garlic cloves?
10 to 15, or probably about 10. I'd say about 10 to 15 centimeters. So think of a ruler, about half the ruler. I think that's about 15 centimeters. Not too close, because they're going to be competing for space and hence the nutrients and so on as well.
What else have we got? Someone's asking about how long do you run the drip irrigation? Guess that's
Yeah.
for your particular.
Yeah, I know. General rule of thumb, and it really depends if it's rained or not. My general rule is at least 45 minutes, and it's running off my water tank, which thankfully refilled itself last weekend. Otherwise, it was running dry. So 45 minutes I would run my drip irrigation system for. And how often I do it, well, it depends how dry. So it could be every second day of a summer, it could be every third day if it's not been too wet. Sorry, too dry.
We're getting lots of questions about watering someone. So yeah, maybe someone's recommended we run a session, so that might be a good idea. There's another person who's interested in what would you top up wicking beds with, i.e., the same recommendations as with an in-ground bed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So you need to rejuvenate that soil as well. So I'm going to be emptying out the compost bins and adding some of that to it. Yeah. And you find that with any raised bed, you do find the soil level does drop every time you harvest stuff away.
Mm.
Now, if you're into this type of planting called permaculture, where the aim is to minimize external inputs and try to use as much as what you can from your own garden, they utilize this method called chop and drop. So your tomato plants, you're chopping them all down and you're leaving them to rot on the soil rather than moving them away, turning them into compost and then having to bring the compost back to your soil. So minimizing inputs in terms of energy as well as external inputs if you have to buy manure and compost. So you can chop and drop, or you have to, yes, your soil level continue to drop unless you put things back into it.
Yeah, so topping it up with compost, like you said earlier, and
Yeah,
all those kinds of things.
yeah.
Rowena's got a question about their worm farm. They're going to be away for 5 weeks and no one's going to be around. Should they move it?
It's definitely, if you've got a garage or a cool spot, should never be in the sun anyway, particularly at this time of the year. Yes, definitely move it. Feed it up, okay? Give them plenty of food. And then I would put a thick wad of, say, newspaper over the top, moistened newspaper, and they'll just chew through that. Worms are really intelligent, okay? They will reproduce as long as there's food available. If not, they'll just keep going through what they've got there. They'll just keep eating through their own vermicast. But if you've left them out and they're out in the sun, you might come back and you lift up the lid and it smells. It's because you've killed them. So definitely over summer, them has to be under a cool shady tree or in a complete south side of your building, whatever it is that doesn't get any direct sunlight, or garage if you've got the space.
And someone has said, I have a few small sprouts of cherry and loads of buffalo grass coming up from my neighbour's garden in unwanted spaces. How do we control buffalo grass or grassy weeds in general, I
Oh
guess?
God, they're awful, aren't they? I
Mm.
did have two veggie patches which I've converted now to lawn because of that issue. I really don't know how to control it. Mine was more a cooch or kikuyu, I'm not sure, probably kikuyu, and it is dreadful. So I converted those veggie patches to growing fruit trees, and I've got rid of any edging so we can mow over them. Honestly, I don't have an answer. It really is a huge problem because even if you put a barrier down, the barrier's got to go at least, say, 40 to 50 centimeters down because those roots will go in and under. So short of moving house, I really don't know what to do, or try to keep the veggie patches away, or grow completely raised again in some sort of wicking bed system.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
It's yeah, otherwise it's a constant battle
Oh,
to be
it's
constantly
and we
weeding.
gave up in the end. It was just too much. Yeah.
Yep. Um, I think that's all the questions it looks like. So if anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to pop them in. We've got a couple more minutes. But yeah, before everyone ducks off, thank you all again so much. Thank you, Maria, as well, for your great presentation tonight. It was
My
really
pleasure.
informative. Um, I will be sending out a very short survey smack bang on 8:30. I've got it scheduled, ready to go out. So if you've got a few minutes, I'd love it if you could fill that in and send us back your details. We've got a lot of events on over the next month or so. So if you aren't following us on social media, we're on Instagram. Otherwise, check out our website. I'm also going to be at Pets in the Park, which is a very fun event on Sunday. So if you're in Stonington or live around the area, feel free to pop in. I'm going to be bringing some seeds as well. So if you're keen to have a go at doing some seed propagation, come in and find me. Um, Now, let me just see. There's lots of thank yous. Let me just quickly check if there's any more comments. Doesn't look like it. Oh, someone's asked about pet poo composting, and we're going to be talking about that on Sunday too. So if you're interested in that, come along to Pets in the Park. I
A,
think
a quick
that's
a quick response to that. Just don't put it on your veggie patch, okay? Put it around your
yes.
fruit trees, that's fine, but just don't put any pet poo composted in your veggie patch. It can go anywhere else, just not your veggies.
Oh, Joanne's got a great answer for the grass is to get chickens.
Yeah, I suppose put your chicken coop around them. That'll kill off the grass,
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. That's
It will
right.
too. Yeah, yeah.
Lovely.
Well,
All
thanks
right.
everyone. Happy gardening. I hope you sort of get inspired to get out there and we get a bit more rain to re-wet that soil for you and have
Definitely.
fun over winter with it all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everyone. See you
Thanks,
later.
Debbie.